It's a moment 16 years in the making. Legendary alt-rockers The Cure have finally released their long-promised new album. Was it worth the wait? My review of Songs of a Lost World is coming up next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so you won't miss future reviews and more. It feels uniquely challenging to me to consider The Cure to be a legacy rock act. The legacy label is one I've generally reserved for groups like the Rolling Stones or solo work from Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, or David Gilmour. All of those acts hit their commercial and artistic peak with their original bands at least a decade before The Cure and were already considered classic rock when Robert Smith and his gothic bandmates were singing Friday I'm in Love. The Cure certainly qualify for the moniker of new wave, though, and to that end perhaps now a new wave of legacy acts. Acts that emerged in the late 70s and early 80s, quickly closing in on a 50-year milestone that's been in the rearview mirror of, say, Bob Dylan for more than a decade. With the exception of The Cure, I've had the pleasure of reviewing new albums from every one of the acts I've just mentioned, something that, for me as a music reviewer, I consider to be a privilege. But I've also stated in prior videos that a legacy, as impressive as it may be, is not a free pass or a guarantee of a glowing review of any musical output they may release. And if we're keeping it real here, I think it is very fair to say that few legacy acts ever objectively achieve a level of artistic success decades after their peak. Commercial success, certainly, but album sales is never a measure of quality. When the Rolling Stones ended a nearly 20-year dry spell between new albums last year, Hackney Diamonds was all but guaranteed to be a huge seller. The biggest surprise, though, was that it was actually really, really good. Better than any of us could have realistically expected. So, now a year later, we find the fabled and newly labeled legacy act, The Cure, dropping their first new album in 16 years with the long-teased and long-delayed Songs of a Lost World. Like all legacy acts, the massive built-in fan base all but guarantees this album's commercial success. But the question, as my friend over on Classic Album Review so often asks, is it any good? The loud critical consensus on the album has been a resounding yes, and spoiler alert, I'm happy to add my own voice to that chorus. Many have heralded the album as the band's best since Disintegration. I'm tempted to agree with that sentiment as well, but I hate to do so without a couple caveats. First of all, I think most of us can agree that Disintegration is The Cure's masterpiece. I've featured it as part of my Great 28 series and would definitely rank it among the best albums of all time. So obviously there's a very high bar that's been set, but I would argue that The Cure did release two very strong but very different albums post-Disintegration that admirably strived for greatness as well. Wish saw the band at its most pop, recognizing their potential as hitmakers and delivering a terrific blend of their trademark alt-rock sound with mainstream radio-friendly hooks. For those same reasons, it's not one of my favorite albums, nor I suspect would it be for many longtime Cure fans. But stepping outside of that sense of ownership that fans often have, I think Wish is actually a very good album for what it is. But then there's Bloodflowers, which saw the band return to their darkest roots and all but abandon any radio-friendly sensibilities they'd cultivated previously. For many fans, myself among them, it was a welcome return after the sometimes saccharine sound their music had dwelled upon throughout the 90s. Bloodflowers would be nearly unrecognizable to listeners who only knew the hits. For me, Bloodflowers is the album I've regarded most highly in the post-Disintegration era, and it's the one that makes me but when I hear the new album being called The Cure's best since Disintegration. But what about Bloodflowers? I don't know, I feel like many have forgotten that dark gem, and that's a shame because if you're loving this new music, you should absolutely go back and rediscover that album. It's not necessarily to say that one album is better than the other. Undoubtedly, listening to Songs of a Lost World most strongly reminds me of Bloodflowers, and it feels like a logical evolution from that album. Certainly more so than the somewhat forgettable self-titled album that followed, or 413 Dream in 2008. I'm thrilled that Lost World finds the band back in their most gothic and despair-drenched mode. Pop sensibilities be damned. The opening track on the album, which also served as the first single, made their intentions clear, and I can say that Alone is vintage Cure, but that also requires identifying which vintage. Clearly, it's Disintegration. I mean, Head on the Door is a great album, but you won't find another Close to Me or In Between Days here. Totally different vintage. With this opening song, we hear the triumphant return of their trademark guitar sound, one I've often referred to as the guitar at the bottom of an aquarium sound. With the extended instrumental intro leading to Smith's strong and despondent as ever vocals, the stage is set, and immediately, I'm here for it. Next up is And Nothing Is Forever, a track that teases the listener with lush synth strings and some brighter major chords, yet still steeped in melancholy. If the album's title and the opening track hadn't already clued you in, the lyrics here show a theme emerging. I know that my world is grown old, and nothing is forever, Smith laments. The sentiments in that line permeate the bulk of the album. It isn't necessarily the world that's grown old, it's my world, Smith himself. He's 65 now, and to that end, I would not expect his songwriting to come from the same place as when he crafted Boys Don't Cry. That will be even more apparent as the album progresses. The second single from the album finds its forever home at track 3, and that's a fragile thing. If there's anything on this record that might be deemed radio-friendly, this song comes closest. It's the perfect blend of all of its sonic elements, from the instrumentation to the vocals. You can really hear on this song how the keyboards are a bit of an unsung hero on Lost World. There's so many great little accents throughout this track, as well as many others that truly pull me into the mix. I also get a bit of a Peter Gabriel vibe on this song, reminiscent of his last couple albums. Musically, though, not lyrically. Gabriel would not have been this dark of a wordsmith. Speaking of words, the song also finds Smith back in his trademark dialogue lyrical mode. He's basically quoting his lover throughout the song with the words, "she said," repeated 6 times. If you did a lyrical audit of The Cure's discography, I have a feeling the words "she said" would appear with shocking frequency. One of the album's high points for me shows up here in the middle on War Song. My reaction to the opening 10 seconds or so of this track was, oh shit, but in the best way possible. I mean, what a dark and deliciously foreboding sonic landscape the band establishes right at the outset. Very powerful and very effective. I hear echoes of the opening title track from Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, blended with the Pornography album. Wow, I mean, as if I hadn't felt it already, I really felt it here. The Cure are back. That dark and dirty feeling continues on Drone No Drone, kicking off with the thunderous percussion reminiscent of Never Enough. This is arguably the most chaotic song on the album, both musically and lyrically. I definitely hear shades of Nine Inch Nails here, possibly a nod to Trent Reznor, who inducted the band into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 5 years ago. I absolutely don't want to characterize this as an album low point, but I will say that it is my least favorite song on the record. Earlier, I mentioned Smith's advancing age, and of course with that comes an accumulation of life experiences, good and bad. In the 16 years since the last album, Smith has clearly been storing up life experiences, one of which is powerfully highlighted on I Can Never Say Goodbye. This is perhaps the most personal song on the album, with Smith grieving over the death of his brother. Again, as we all get older, the impacts of mortality are inevitable. Memento Mori, as The Cure's contemporaries Depeche Mode most recently highlighted, another example of how these kinds of ruminations are not uncommon in new music from legacy artists. One other comment I want to make on this song is a minor lyrical note. I'm a bit of a stickler when it comes to the use of cliches in lyrics. I was initially annoyed by the repetition of the line, "Something wicked this way comes," in the song's lyrics. After reflecting on it further and considering the fact that it's a Shakespearean reference, I'll give it some grace. Now, I say all of that as we transition into the penultimate track, featuring what I would say is the album's core lyrical thesis. All of the ruminations on love, life, aging, and death, it all comes together on All I Ever Am. This is a song the Robert Smith of Disintegration could never have written, at least not with any degree of credibility. It's a powerful exploration of the kinds of thoughts that we inevitably all must grapple with as we get older. I could pull out virtually any lyric from this song as a shining example, but maybe the opening and closing lines illustrate it best. Smith begins with the line, "I think too much of all that's gone, of how it was before." And then at the end, at the cold full stop end, he sings, "And all for fear of what I'll find if I just stop." On All I Ever Am, Robert Smith is all of us. And if he's not you now, he's you in the future. Songs of a Lost World concludes with the appropriately titled end song. By this point in the album, it strikes me that so many songs like this song are exactly why this album may be polarizing for some listeners that only know the hits. The soundscape here is so lush and washes over you like warm ocean waves. But just like heaven, it is not. I love it, but I can see how some may not, or even find it, dare I say, boring. In any case, End Song delivers an incredibly cinematic climax. I recently heard The Cure's song A Forest in one of HBO's prestige dramas and thought, wow, why don't we hear more needle drops from The Cure more often? The music itself is already so epic and cinematic. End Song is another perfect example. I mean, it's nearly 6.5 minutes before the vocal kicks in. It's an incredible 6.5 minute buildup, and when Smith's voice finally arrives after the extended instrumental prelude, it's an instrument in and of itself. It all concludes in the most epic way, sticking the landing with one of the most perfect closing moments I've heard on an album in years. So whenever I see critics seemingly falling all over themselves to heap praise on something, I respond with what I would say is a healthy skepticism. The apparent universal acclaim for this album is not unwarranted. I'm actually quite happy to confirm that. I think the comparisons to Disintegration are more than valid, but conversely, I'm not as quick to dismiss the band's post-Disintegration output, particularly Bloodflowers, because, as I said, that's the album this one most strongly resembles. I, for one, think that's a good thing, because up until all the recent hyperbole over Lost World, I'd have said Bloodflowers was their best work since Disintegration. This new music is right up there, though. And for all the Disintegration references people are making, this is absolutely not Disintegration Part 2. Do not go into this record hoping for another Pictures of You or Love Song. That was 1989. This album, in contrast, feels like exactly the album The Cure should be making in 2024, some 35 years later. On that level, or any other really, it's a triumph. So I'm giving Songs of a Lost World by The Cure an X rating of 8 out of 10. And mind you, I'm as close to this being a 9 out of 10 as I've ever been. But I think the album needs to grow, to exist, to find its place. And in time, I have no doubt it will be seen as one of The Cure's best albums. The only question is, how high will it rank among the faithful fans? Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, plus check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.